Thank you for joining me on my YouTube channel. My name is Christiana Sage. On this channel, I will be teaching about international law, and these teachings will be in the form of short weekly lecture series. Over time, I will be surfacing varied concepts of international law. When and where applicable, these concepts will be analyzed and brought to you as it relates to current trends in international law as they arise. At the end of this lecture, you will find the transcript of the lecture in the link below. Also, for current trend and analysis in international law, you can subscribe to my blog. All the details you will find in the comment section below. For the 10th lecture in this lecture series, we will be exploring the concept of self-determination. Specific to this lesson, we will unpack this concept by answering the questions: what is self-determination and what are the types of self-determination? What is self-determination? The principle of self-determination rests on the notion that a people have a right to determine their statehood, government, and their political allegiance freely and without interference. The political origin of the modern concept of self-determination stems from the United States of America's Declaration of Independence of 4th July 1776, which states that governments derived their just power from the consent of the governed, and that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Under international law, this concept became prominent after World War I. And in this time, the question of what constitutes a people was subject to some limitation. During this era, peoples was restricted to nationally organized ethnic groups under the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian empires. At the end of World War II, following the ratification of the United Nations Charter, the principle of self-determination became entrenched into the framework of the international system. In the preamble of the United Nations Charter, this principle was entrenched. According to Article 1(2) of the UN Charter, one of the purposes of the United Nations is to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. Within the United Nations system, concerted efforts were made to develop this principle. A significant contribution in this regard was the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, and that is United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1514 XV of 14 December 1960. According to this resolution, all peoples have a right to self-determination. Further to the Charter of the United Nations and the UNGA Declaration, the principle of self-determination has been entrenched in other international and regional instruments, such as Article 1(1) of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Article 1(1) of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which state that all peoples have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Further to Article 1(1) of the ICCPR and the ICESCR, Article 1(3) entrenches a collective responsibility of state parties of both instruments and governing authorities for non-self-governing and trust territories to foster the realization of self-determination. Article 1(3) reads, The state parties to the present covenant, including those having responsibility for the administration of non-self-governing and trust territories, shall promote the realization of the right of self-determination and shall respect that right in conformity with the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations. Therefore, we see that the inclusion of this principle in Part 1 of the UN Charter indicates that this is a cardinal principle of international law. Beyond being a cardinal principle of international law, its inclusion in the ICCPR and ICESCR also entrenches this principle as a collective human right of a group of people. We also see this principle in Part 1 of the preamble of the Helsinki Final Act. We see this also in Article 20 of the African Charter of Human and People's Rights, the Charter of Paris for a New Europe, the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, the UNGA Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. This principle has also received judicial flavor in the case of legal consequences for states of the continued presence of South Africa and Namibia, Southwest Africa, notwithstanding Security Council Resolution 276, 1970. And also in the Western Sahara case and the East Timor case of Portugal versus Australia. In all, the right to self-determination is recognized as a process right that can result in a range of outcomes, either social, political, or economic. In its economic context, the principle implies people's right to economic development through the reintegration of its natural resources and wealth into the state's national assets for the economic development and welfare of its people. So, to the types of self-determination. The principle of self-determination has been classified into two types. We see this classification also in General Recommendation number 21 on the right to self-determination of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It is classified as internal self-determination and external self-determination. Internal self-determination is so called because it acknowledges the existence of an already constituted state and a struggle to gain control within the boundaries of the already existing state. Internal self-determination encompasses the right of a nation within an already constituted state to choose its form of government and determine its economic, social, or cultural policy that it intends to pursue. In this regard, the people possess rights to choose and keep their own government, the right for linguistic, ethnic, and religious minority not to be oppressed by the government at the center, and the right to determine their economic and political policies, including the use of its natural resources. Antithetical to internal self-determination, external self-determination infers a state struggle to hold on to and to determine its political status, including the formation and recognition of an independent state and the rejection of alien domination and external interference. In this way, we see that independence is not the only conceivable product of an exercise of self-determination. To recap, we have addressed what the principle of self-determination is and proceeded to show that beyond being a cardinal principle of international law, it is also a people's right. We have also addressed two ways that self-determination can present, internal or external. So I want to say thank you so very much for joining in, and remember to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that you're notified when there's a new video. Thank you.